He signed the papers before she could say a word. Not across a desk, not in some quiet office where the lawyer shuffled documents and pretended this was normal. He signed them in the middle of her father's living room, in front of the staff, in front of her mother, who was still holding a dish towel, because nobody had told her yet that they no longer owned anything, including the house they were standing in. Vincent Holloway capped his pen, set it on the stack of papers, and looked at his niece like she was an inconvenience he'd finally resolved. "It's done," he said. "The debt transfers this afternoon." Serena stared at the signature. Her uncle's handwriting, neat and unhurried, like he'd signed a birthday card. "You didn't even call me first." "I didn't need to." He picked up his jacket from the armchair. Her father's armchair, the one with the worn left armrest where he always rested his elbow, and shrugged it on. "You would have argued. This way is cleaner." Her mother said quietly, "What does it mean? The debt transfers? To whom?" Vincent didn't answer her. He was already checking his phone. That was the moment. Not when Serena found out about the debt. Not when she saw the numbers, the frozen accounts, the letters from 3 different banks arriving in the same week. Not even when her father, Edward Holloway, who had built a shipping company from one leased dock and a second-hand cargo truck, sat at his kitchen table and could not look up from his hands. The moment was Vincent capping his pen. The moment was him not answering her mother. If you were in that room, you would have felt it too. That specific stillness before something breaks. You would have asked yourself the same thing Serena asked. What did he just do? And why does it feel like he's been waiting years to do it? Subscribe if you're staying. Drop your city in the comments. I want to know how far this story has traveled. Hit like, because what happens next is going to make you furious before it makes you believe in anything again. The Holloway shipping empire, when it fell, did not fall loudly. There were no headlines, no dramatic press conferences, no reporters camped outside the building on West 43rd Street where Holloway Maritime had operated for 22 years. The collapse happened in the language of wire transfers and margin calls, in the private offices of men who never raised their voices because they'd long since learned that money is louder than anything. Edward Holloway had borrowed to expand. That was the story, anyway. The version his CFO told the board, the version his lawyers prepared for the banks, the version Serena had been given when she flew back from London 6 weeks ago because her father sounded wrong on the phone. Not upset. Wrong. Like something behind his voice had already given up. She'd sat across from him at that kitchen table and laid out what she knew. She was a financial analyst. Not a famous one, not yet, but good enough that 2 firms in the city had tried to keep her when she left, and good enough to see within 48 hours of pulling her father's records that the debt structure made no sense. "Dad, these drawdown dates." She'd spread the statements across the table. "You borrowed against 3 separate credit facilities inside of 4 months. The rates are punishing. Nobody does this unless they have no other options or they're not the one making the decisions." Edward looked at the papers. Then he looked at his hands again. "Vincent handled the financing," he said. "He said it was the only way to secure the port contract in Rotterdam. The Rotterdam contract fell through 8 months ago." "I know." "But you kept drawing down." He didn't answer. "Dad, did you sign the drawdown authorizations yourself?" A long silence. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a cab horn. Normal sounds from a world that hadn't noticed yet. "Some of them," he said. She understood then. Not the full shape of it, not yet. That would come later, and it would be worse than she was prepared for. But enough. Enough to know that her father, who trusted his younger brother the way only older brothers trust the ones they helped raise, had been used. She just didn't know for what yet. The debt was $340 million. That number, when she first saw it, felt unreal. It sat on the page like it belonged to someone else's life. But debt at that scale, accumulated that fast, through facilities her father hadn't fully understood, that wasn't recklessness. Recklessness was comprehensible. This was architectural. Someone had designed this. She was still working through the records when Vincent arrived. He came on a Tuesday morning, uninvited, let in by the housekeeper who had worked for her parents for 11 years and who still thought of Vincent Holloway as family. He walked into the study where Serena had spread 3 months of financial records across the floor and he looked at her work for a moment without saying anything. "You shouldn't be doing this," he said. "Sit down, Vincent." "Serena, sit down or leave. Those are your options." He sat. He was 54, lean with silver at his temples, and the kind of face that read as distinguished until you looked at his eyes, which were always calculating something slightly to the left of whoever he was talking to. "Walk me through the Rotterdam facility," she said. "This isn't a board meeting." "No, it's worse. Walk me through it." He did. His version was smooth, practiced, full of reasonable-sounding explanations for each decision point. Serena listened without interrupting and wrote nothing down, because she'd learned early in her career that the moment you pick up a pen, people start editing themselves. When he finished, she said, "The drawdown on March 14th, the $47 million. What was it for?" A pause. Barely visible, but there. "Equipment deposits for the Gdansk expansion." "The Gdansk expansion was suspended on March 9th. I have the board minutes." Vincent looked at her steadily. There were preliminary costs already committed. $47 million in preliminary costs for an expansion that lasted 9 days. "These things are complicated, Serena. You've been working in London. You don't know all the moving parts." She held his gaze. He held hers. Two people in a room who both knew exactly what was happening and were choosing, for different reasons, not to say it out loud yet. "I'm going to find it," she said. "Whatever it is, I'm going to find it." Vincent stood, smoothed his jacket. "Your energy would be better spent figuring out how to support your father through this." He left, and 3 days later, he came back with the papers already signed. The Viscari name was not something you looked up. It was something you heard, always from someone who lowered their voice slightly, always with the specific cadence of a person who wanted to make clear they were telling you something important without wanting to be heard telling you something important. Damien Viscari was 38. His father, Marco, had built the organization across 2 decades of controlled violence and strategic patience, the kind of crime family that preferred accountants to enforcers because accountants were cleaner and more scalable. Marco had died 2 years ago. A stroke, officially, though there were other theories. And Damien had taken over with a coldness that surprised even people who'd expected coldness. Under Marco, the Viscaris had carried a certain courtly brutality. Under Damien, they carried something more dangerous: precision. He did not make threats. He made decisions, and then the decisions happened. And afterward, the people who'd been on the wrong side of those decisions were very quiet about what had occurred. 3 families who'd tested him in his first year had since reorganized, relocated, or disappeared. No one tested him in his second year. What the street knew about him: he was meticulous, he was cold, and he never offered terms twice. What the street didn't know: he had a debt problem. Not his debt, his father's. Marco Viscari, in the final year of his life, had made a series of financial decisions that even Damien, inheriting the books, had taken 3 months to fully understand. Offshore positions, heavily leveraged, structured through a shell network that had seemed impenetrable until 2 of the shells had been quietly compromised, not by law enforcement, but by competitors who'd found the seams first. The exposure was $340 million. The same number, different ledger. Damien's CFO had brought him the figure on a Thursday evening in November, and Damien had sat with it for a long time before asking one question: how long before it becomes unmanageable? 18 months. Maybe less if they move to call the underlying positions. Who holds the exposure on the other side? A man named Edward Holloway, or rather, his company. It was structured through Holloway Maritime as a counterparty, we believe without Holloway's full understanding of the position he was occupying. Damien had looked at the ceiling for a moment. "Someone put him there," he said. It wasn't a question. "That's our assessment." "Find out who." That investigation was still running when Vincent Holloway walked into a meeting that Damien had not agreed to attend, but attended anyway because the intermediary was someone he owed a conversation to, and because the proposal Vincent laid out was either the most elegant solution Damien had seen in 2 years or the most dangerous trap he'd ever been shown, possibly both. Vincent's offer was this: his niece, Serena Holloway. In exchange for the debt being restructured rather than called a controlled unwinding instead of a collapse that would expose both families to federal scrutiny, Serena would marry Damien Vescari. The marriage would be legal, documented, and public enough to signal alliance between the Holloway assets and the Vescari organization. It would buy time. It would create a legal buffer. And it would give Damien a credentialed financial analyst with intimate knowledge of the Holloway books inside his own household. Damien had looked at Vincent for a long time after the proposal. "Does she know?" he asked. "She will." "That's not what I asked." Vincent held his gaze. "She'll agree. She loves her father." It was the wrong answer, and Damien filed it away. He said yes. Not because of the marriage, not because of the buffer, not even entirely because of the debt. He said yes because someone had built a $340 million trap using two families who'd never met, and the only person in the room who might know how it had been built was the woman Vincent was so carefully offering up. He wanted to know what she knew. He wanted to know what she was. Do it. Serena found out on a Wednesday. Her father called her into the sitting room, not the study where she'd been working, but the formal sitting room, which the family only used for conversations that needed to feel official. He was standing near the window. He couldn't sit. "There's a proposal," he said. "Vincent has arranged it. With the Vescari family." Serena stood very still. "A business arrangement?" her father continued, and his voice broke slightly on arrangement, which was the word doing the most work in the sentence. "A marriage. To the son. Damien. It would restructure the debt. It would—" "Stop." He stopped. "Are you asking me," Serena said carefully, "to marry a mafia boss to cover your debt?" "The debt isn't— I didn't—" Edward Holloway pressed a hand to his forehead. He looked like a man trying to hold his skull together. "I didn't understand what I was signing, Serena. I thought it was standard credit facilities. I thought Vincent was handling the risk." "I know," she said it quietly. "Dad, I know." He looked at her. His eyes were red. "Where's Marcus?" she asked. Her brother, 29, supposed to be in Amsterdam, had stopped answering calls 6 weeks ago. She'd assumed it was the family chaos, the way Marcus always went quiet under pressure. "Have you actually spoken to him?" Something crossed her father's face, something that looked like it had been locked in a box for a long time. "Marcus," he said slowly, "is not in Amsterdam." The box opened. Vincent, it turned out, had told Edward 3 weeks ago. Not as an alarm, as leverage. Marcus Holloway had been held since April, 8 months, by people whose names Edward didn't know and whose instructions had come through Vincent. As long as the family cooperated with the restructuring, Marcus would be returned. If they went to the police, if they contacted lawyers, if they made any move to contest the debt or expose its origins, Marcus would not come home. Serena sat down. She didn't remember choosing to sit. Her legs made the decision. 8 months. Her brother had been missing for 8 months, and her father had known for 3 weeks, and Vincent had built the whole structure around that silence. "He'll be returned," her father said. "Vincent promised. Once the marriage is formalized—" "Vincent promised." Serena repeated the words slowly, tasting how hollow they were. "The man who structured a fraudulent debt facility against your company and kidnapped your son made you a promise." Edward flinched. She looked at her hands for a moment, then she looked up. "I'll do it," she said. "Serena, I'll do it, but I'm not doing it because of Vincent's promise." She stood. "I'm doing it because I need to be inside that family to find out what Vincent has actually built. And because the man I'm marrying is either part of it, or he's another person who got used, and I need to know which." Her father stared at her. "Don't tell Vincent I said that," she said. "Don't tell Vincent anything I say from this point forward." It was the first instruction she gave in what she already understood was going to be a very long operation. The wedding was 11 days later. Not a ceremony. A signing. A judge in a private room off the lobby of a building in Midtown that belonged, technically, to a real estate holding company that belonged, technically, to 3 other entities that eventually connected to the Vescari organization. 2 witnesses on each side. No flowers, no music. Serena wore a gray dress she'd bought the afternoon before because she hadn't owned anything appropriate, and had refused to let her mother spend money on something that didn't deserve it. Damien Vescari was already in the room when she arrived. She'd looked him up, of course. The photographs were all from events, charity galas, industry functions, and in all of them he had the look of a man who was present only in the most technical sense. Tall, dark-haired, face that could have been handsome if it ever moved into something warmer. It didn't. He looked at her when she walked in the way you look at a structural problem you're deciding how to solve. She looked back at him the same way. The judge read the words. They signed the papers. Damien's attorney slid a document across the table. A separate agreement, 3 pages, dense with specifics. Serena read every word before signing it, which appeared to mildly surprise the attorney and not surprise Damien at all. The document formalized what she already understood. She was a business arrangement. She would live in the Vescari estate in Westchester. She would have access to certain household accounts for personal expenses. She would not discuss family business with outside parties. She would not attempt to leave the estate without prior arrangement. The marriage could be dissolved at Damien's discretion after the debt restructuring was complete, which was estimated at 18 months. She signed it. Damien looked at her signature for a moment. Then he said without particular warmth, "There are rules in my house. You'll learn them." "I'm a quick study," Serena said. Something shifted slightly in his expression. Not warmth, more like recalibration. They drove to the estate in separate cars. She had been in the house for 6 hours when the shooting started. She was in the room she'd been assigned, large, well-furnished, impersonal, like a hotel room in a country where someone else had chosen all the aesthetics, when she heard the first shot. Then the sound of glass. Then shouting, somewhere below, in a language she didn't speak but recognized as panic. She did not hide under the bed. She did not freeze in place. These were things she thought about afterward, the roads not taken, and she was never sure whether her response was courage or just an absence of the particular kind of imagination that lets people stay still when things are happening. She opened her door. The hallway was empty, lights on. Below, through the staircase, she could hear movement. Multiple people. Disciplined movement, not the scramble of the household staff. She moved toward the sound. Later, she couldn't have explained why. Something in the house's layout told her which way the study was. Or maybe it was just that the sound of men moving with purpose had a direction, and that direction was where someone important was. She found Damien in the corridor outside the study, pinned behind a doorframe, 2 men in dark clothing visible at the far end. One of them was bringing up a weapon. The angle was wrong. Damien was exposed on his left and hadn't registered it yet, because the immediate threat was ahead. Serena picked up a bronze bookend from a hallway table. Heavy, roughly 2 pounds, the kind of decorative object placed in hallways by people who want to look cultured without thinking about what bookends are actually for, and threw it at the man on the left with the full rotation of her body behind it. She'd been a competitive tennis player until she was 19. She hadn't lost all of it. The bookend caught the man in the shoulder, which wasn't what she'd aimed for, but it was enough. He stumbled. The shot went wide. Damien turned, assessed the situation in what looked like less than a second, and moved. What followed was efficient and extremely violent and over in less than 3 minutes. When it was done, when the 2 men were secured and the rest of Damien's people had swept and cleared the other entry points, Damien turned and looked at Serena the way he'd looked at her that afternoon. Except different. Still no warmth. But the calculation had changed. Something had been added to it. Something that looked, if she was reading it correctly, like genuine uncertainty about who she was. "The bookend," he said. "I saw the angle. You could have been shot. You would have been shot. There's a difference." He looked at her for another long moment. His face didn't do much. She was already learning that about him. But something was working behind it. "Why?" he said. She held his eyes. "I need to know what my uncle built. You're the only other person in this situation who has reason to help me find it." She paused. "I couldn't do that if you were dead." It was the truth. Not the whole truth, but the part of it she was willing to give him yet. Damien looked at the floor, then back at her, then at the 2 secured men who were going to have a very difficult night. He said nothing else, but he didn't dismiss her either. In the Viscari household, she was already learning silence was its own kind of answer. The two men they'd secured that night didn't last until morning, not because anyone killed them, because by 4 a.m., when Damien's head of security, a thick-necked man named Reyes, who moved like someone who'd learned to take up less space than his body naturally wanted, finished the first round of questioning, both men had given enough to confirm what Damien already suspected, and not nearly enough to confirm who had sent them. Professionals. Hired out through a cutout. The chain would dead-end inside 2 moves. Damien stood in the doorway of the room where Reyes had been working and looked at the results of the night for a long moment. Then he said, "Hold them," and walked out. Serena was still in the corridor. She hadn't gone back to her room. She'd found a chair, a hard one, straight-backed, the kind nobody puts in a hallway for comfort, and she was sitting in it with her arms crossed and her eyes open, not sleeping, just waiting, the way people wait when they've decided they're entitled to information. Damien stopped when he saw her. "You should be in your room," he said. "Those men were sent by someone who knew the layout of this house." She kept her voice flat. "Entry point, patrol timing, your location at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. That's not a random hit. Someone gave them the blueprint." He looked at her. "So either you have a leak," she said, "or someone who recently gained access to information about this household arranged the attack. And the only new variable in this house as of today is me." She held his eyes. "Which means if you're thinking clearly, I'm your first suspect. And I need you to know that I know that, so we can skip the part where you have me watched without telling me and get to the part where you tell me what you actually found out tonight." The corridor was quiet. Somewhere below, Reyes was talking to someone in a low voice. Damien pulled the other chair from against the wall. There were 2, because whoever had furnished this hallway had been optimistic about the social lives of people waiting in corridors, and sat down across from her. Not close. The chairs were 6 feet apart, which felt like the right distance for 2 people who had been married for approximately 9 hours. "The entry point," he said, "was a service corridor off the east kitchen. The access code was changed 2 weeks ago. Only 7 people in this household have the current code. And I'm not one of them." "No? So I'm not your leak?" "No." He paused. "You're something else." "What?" He looked at his hands for a moment. A habit, she noticed. He looked at his hands when he was deciding how much to say. "You threw a bookend at a man with a gun. In a house you'd been in for 6 hours. In a hallway you had no reason to be in. I already explained that. You explained the reasoning. I'm talking about the instinct." His eyes came back up. "Most people don't move toward gunfire. The ones who do are either trained or they have something specific they're protecting. I told you what I'm protecting. You told me a version of it." She held his gaze. He was right, and they both knew it, and the fact that he was right without having enough information yet to know exactly how right he was told her something about him she filed away carefully. "My brother," she said. "His name is Marcus. He's 29. He plays guitar badly, and he has a scar on his left hand from a boat accident in 2019, and he has been held somewhere by people my uncle controls for 8 months. Her voice didn't waver. She'd decided on the drive to Westchester that she wasn't going to perform composure, and she wasn't going to perform emotion either. She was just going to be accurate. Vincent used him as leverage to keep my father compliant while the debt was being structured. The deal, my being here, was supposed to result in Marcus being released. Damien was very still. "I don't think Vincent intends to release him," she said. "I think Marcus is too useful as a permanent control mechanism, which means the terms of this marriage, as my uncle presented them to both of us, were built on a premise that was false from the beginning." "What do you want from me?" "Information about who's holding him, resources to find out where, and when we locate him, I want to go." "You want to go?" Damien repeated slowly. "With whoever you send. I'm not asking to go alone." She paused. "I'm asking to go." He looked at her for a long time. She couldn't read what was happening in there, and she'd stopped trying to read it the way she'd tried with Vincent. Because Damien's face wasn't performing anything. It was just processing. "Go to your room," he said finally. "Get some sleep. We'll talk in the morning." It wasn't yes. But it wasn't no. and she was starting to understand that in this house, those were different things. Morning arrived gray and cold, the way November mornings in Westchester announced themselves without apology. Serena was up at 5:30. She'd slept 3 hours, which was more than she'd expected. She showered, dressed, and went looking for coffee, which led her through 2 wrong turns and one alarming encounter with a security detail that materialized out of what appeared to be a coat closet before she found the kitchen. The kitchen was large and smelled of something being prepared by a woman named Donna, who was in her 60s, and who looked at Serena the way people look at a new variable they haven't been given adequate instructions about. "Mrs. Viscari," Donna said, tentatively, like she wasn't sure the title would be accepted. Serena had not thought about the title. It landed wrong, the way a shoe on the wrong foot lands wrong, to functional, but off. "Just Serena is fine. Is there coffee?" There was coffee. Serena sat at the kitchen counter rather than the formal dining room because the formal dining room was the kind of space that made her feel like she was being evaluated, and she was already being evaluated by enough people. She'd been there 20 minutes, working through her second cup and the mental map of everything she knew about the Holloway debt structure, when she became aware that she was not alone in the room in the way she'd thought she was. A man was leaning against the far counter. Not Reyes. Older, slight, with wire-rimmed glasses and the particular stillness of someone who had learned to make themselves unobtrusive in rooms where being noticed was often unpleasant. He was holding a coffee cup and watching her with the mild, attentive expression of a man who was paid to notice things. "You're the consigliere," Serena said. He tilted his head. "Gideon Farr, and you've been doing the math on the Holloway account since you got here." "I've been doing the math since September." "Find anything interesting?" "Find anything worth telling a stranger?" "No." She held his gaze over her cup. "You're going to tell me you're not a stranger, that we're family now, in whatever sense this arrangement counts as family." Gideon smiled. It was a practiced smile, warm and precise, the kind that had been refined over many years of situations that required warmth without actual warmth. "I was going to say I might be able to help." "With what?" "You're trying to understand what your uncle built. I've been trying to understand a separate piece of the same structure for 18 months. It's possible we're looking at the same thing from different angles." Serena set down her cup. "Why would you tell me that?" "Because you saved Damien's life last night with a bookend." He paused. "And because I'm curious about a woman who walks into a Mafia household as a debt settlement and immediately starts running an investigation." "I'm not running an investigation." "You've been awake since 5:30 cross-referencing dates in your head. I can tell by the way you've been looking at the counter." He tilted his head again. "What date keeps coming up?" She said nothing. "March 14th, Gideon said quietly. Serena went still. $47 million, he continued, same quiet tone. Drawn against the Holloway credit facility. The same day a corresponding position was opened in a Viscari offshore account in the Caymans, an account that doesn't appear in any internal record I'm authorized to access, but that I have seen referenced twice in documents that were supposed to have been destroyed. He took a slow sip of coffee. I've been sitting on that for 6 months because I didn't know what it connected to. And then Damien married you, and last night someone tried to kill him, and now you're in my kitchen doing math. The kitchen was very quiet. Donna had apparently found somewhere else to be. Your kitchen, Serena said carefully. Figure of speech. She looked at him. The practiced warmth in his face was still there, but underneath it something was working, something that looked like genuine urgency and might have been. The problem was that genuine urgency and performed genuine urgency were very hard to distinguish from the inside of a conversation, and she was talking to a man whose job description was essentially to be good at both. I want to see the references, she said, the documents that mention the Cayman account. I can arrange that. And I want to know why you're bringing this to me instead of Damien. Gideon was quiet for a moment. Because Damien has a decision to make about whether to trust you, and I don't want to short-circuit that by making it for him. I'm bringing this to you so you can bring it to him when the time is right. He paused. And because whatever your uncle built, it's going to require someone who understands the financial architecture to dismantle it. Damien is exceptional at many things. Balance sheets are not among them. She picked her cup back up, looked at it rather than at him. I'll look at the documents, she said. That's all I'm committing to right now. That's all I'm asking for right now. He set down his cup, straightened, and left the kitchen with the same unhurried quiet he'd arrived with. Serena watched him go. Then she sat with the silence for a moment and thought about March 14th and $47 million and the specific way Gideon Farr had named that number. Not as a question, but as a key, slid across a counter to see whether she'd pick it up. She wasn't sure yet whether he was an ally or another door to somewhere she wasn't supposed to go. She picked up the key anyway. But Damien called her into his study at 9 a.m. The study was different from what she'd expected. She'd built a picture of it from the kind of man he'd presented himself to be. Spare, cold, functional. The room was spare and functional, yes, but the books were real, and they'd been read. The margins on the ones she could see from the doorway marked up in tight, precise handwriting. Maps on one wall, not decorative. A desk that looked like it had been worked on for years and showed it. He was standing when she came in. He gestured at the chair across from the desk. She sat. He stayed standing, which told her this was either a power posture or a man who thought better on his feet. She suspected the latter. "Tell me about the March 14th drawdown," he said. She told him nothing about March 14th. She looked at him steadily, and he held her gaze, and she understood that his people had been listening in the kitchen, and she'd known that was a possibility, and had said what she'd said anyway. "My uncle drew $47 million against my father's credit facility on March 14th, she said. The stated purpose was equipment deposits for a European expansion that had already been suspended. The money went somewhere else." "Where?" "I don't know yet, but your consigliere thinks a corresponding position appeared in a Viscari offshore account the same day." Damien's expression didn't change, but something behind it went very quiet. "He told you that?" "This morning, in the kitchen." "Gideon." He said the name the way you say the name of someone you're in the middle of reevaluating. He said he wanted me to bring it to you when the time was right. I'm deciding the time is right. And if I hadn't been listening? You were always going to be listening. You'd have found out by tonight either way. She kept her voice even. I'd rather you find out because I told you than because you were eavesdropping. It says something different about me. He looked at her. Then he walked around the desk and sat down, and now they were facing each other on level ground, and something about the geometry of that felt like a shift. "The Cayman account," he said. "If it exists, and I'm not confirming that it does, it would mean someone moved money through my organization without authorization. During my father's tenure or after. Or both. Or both." He laced his fingers on the desk. "And the most likely person to arrange that would be someone who had access to both the Holloway accounts and the Viscari structure simultaneously. Yes. Your uncle is a financial consultant. His client list is private." "I know. If he was advising both families..." "He wasn't advising your family," Serena said. "He was using it. There's a difference. Advising implies a relationship. What he built was a one-way conduit." She paused. "He moved money through your structures without your father knowing, or possibly with your father knowing and your father not understanding what it meant. Either way, when the position had to be closed, when the exposure became too large, he needed a mechanism to force both families into a specific configuration, a configuration he controlled." "The marriage," Damien said. "The marriage. Me, inside your household, access to Viscari records, a legitimate reason for financial documentation to flow between the two families." She met his eyes. "I was supposed to be his accountant, inside your house." A silence that had real weight to it. "He told you that?" "He didn't need to. I'm his niece. I know how he thinks." She kept her voice flat. "He's been watching me work for 12 years. He knows exactly what I'm capable of. He didn't offer me to you because I'd make a compliant wife. He offered me to you because I'm the best forensic analyst in my family, and he wanted me inside this house with access to your books. To find what? Evidence of what he built, so he could control what happened to it." She let that sit for a moment. "He doesn't want the structure exposed. He wants it found by the right person, someone he can manage, and then buried cleanly. I was supposed to be that person." Damien was very still. "Were you?" he said. I'm talking to you instead of calling him with what I've found. You tell me. The documents Gideon had referenced took 2 days to materialize, not because they were hard to find, because Gideon, Serena discovered, was a man of layered precautions who'd spent 18 months being careful in a household where carelessness had consequences, and he wasn't going to hand her a manila folder of explosive financial evidence without first establishing, methodically, that she was who she appeared to be. He was thorough. She respected it without enjoying it. On the 3rd day, he put a hard drive on the kitchen counter at 5:45 a.m. The same counter, the same hour, which she thought was probably deliberate, and said, 212 files, cross-referenced against the Holloway records you have on your laptop. You've seen what's on my laptop. I've seen what's on your laptop. She looked at the drive. Damien knows you're doing this. Damien asked me to do this. That wasn't what she'd expected. She picked up the drive. He's testing me. He's working with you. Those are different things, even when they look similar. Gideon picked up his cup. The file labeled March cross-reference. Start there. Make sure you're alone when you open it. She was alone when she opened it. The kitchen, 6 a.m. Donna not yet arrived. She put the drive in her laptop and opened the file and read what was in it. It took her 40 minutes to get through it. When she was done, she sat back and stared at the counter and felt something cold settle in her chest. Not panic, not anger, but the specific chill of a picture coming into focus that was much larger than the frame she'd been looking through. The March 14th transfer wasn't the beginning. It was the 7th move in a sequence that had started 4 years ago, structured across 11 separate financial instruments, using both the Holloway and Viscari accounts as alternating conduits. The money didn't go to the Caymans and stop. It moved. Through Latvia, through a Dubai intermediary, through 3 different Luxembourg entities, and finally into the holding structure of an international logistics company called Meridian Cross Partners. She knew that name. She'd seen it once, briefly, in a document on Vincent's desk 3 years ago when she'd been visiting his office and he'd left the room to take a call. She'd noted it without knowing why it mattered. Her brain had filed it the way it filed everything, quietly, without drama, waiting for context. The context was here. Meridian Cross Partners controlled port access rights across 7 countries. It was legitimate on paper, publicly registered, audited, with a board of independent directors whose names she didn't recognize. But if you owned Meridian Cross and you controlled the debt structures of both a major shipping company and the financial infrastructure of a crime organization, and you had the paper trail structured in a way that implicated both families without implicating you, Vincent wasn't trying to steal money. He was trying to own movement. The physical movement of goods through ports he'd quietly acquired using both families as unwitting financing. And the marriage, her being here, wasn't just about managing the evidence. It was about having someone inside the Viscari household who would, eventually, when the time was right, hand him the last piece he needed to complete the acquisition without anyone being able to trace the origin back to him. She was supposed to find the evidence and bring it to her uncle. And Vincent was patient enough and had known her long enough to have calculated that she'd do exactly what she was doing. Investigate thoroughly, build the picture carefully, and then go to him with it because he was family, and family, in her father's world, was the thing you protected. He'd spent 12 years watching her work. He thought he knew how she'd respond to every variable he'd introduced. He'd miscalculated one thing. He hadn't accounted for the fact that she'd tell Damien first. She was still at the counter when Reyes appeared in the kitchen doorway. His expression was the expression of a man delivering news he hadn't filtered yet. "We found your brother," he said. Serena stood up so fast the stool scraped. "He's alive," Reyes said immediately. "He's at a facility in Newark, warehouse complex privately held. We have the location." He paused. "Mr. Viscari wants to move tonight." She was already moving toward the door. "Miss Holloway." Reyes's voice stopped her. The name, Holloway, not Viscari, was either a mistake or a choice. She'd think about which one later. "He said to tell you, you're going." She turned back. Reyes's face gave nothing. "He said you'd want to," Reyes added. "He said that was the point." She didn't know what that meant yet. She'd know later, much later, that it was the first thing Damien had done that wasn't strategic. that it was, in whatever language he used for such things, a decision made because she'd earned it. But right now she just said, "Tell him I'll be ready in 10 minutes," and went to get her shoes. The warehouse in Newark was not what she'd expected, which meant she'd expected something worse. It was 3 stories, commercial, in a district of similar buildings that had been industrial once and were now in the in-between state of areas that haven't yet decided what they're becoming. Lights in the upper windows. A loading bay on the south side. 2 men outside the main entrance who were not trying to look like guards and were therefore obviously guards. There were 6 of Damien's people, Reyes running it, Damien himself, which she had not expected, and which Reyes's face told her he'd argued against. And Serena. Damien had looked at her when she came out in dark clothes with her hair pulled back and said nothing, but he'd handed her an earpiece, which was its own kind of sentence. The operation took 11 minutes. She stayed back, which she'd agreed to, and watched the entry team move with a competence that she absorbed and filed and tried not to think about the specific skill set it implied. 3 minutes in, the south entrance. 90 seconds of sounds she didn't try to interpret. Then Reyes's voice in her ear. "Second floor, east side. We have him." She went in without asking permission. Marcus was in a room that had been a break room once. Microwave bolted to the wall, plastic chairs, the ghost of a coffee maker in the outlet pattern. He was sitting against the far wall with his wrists zip-tied to a support beam, and when she came through the door, he looked at her with the specific expression of a person who has been waiting so long for something that its arrival doesn't fully register. "Hey," she said. Her voice came out steady. She'd told it to. "Hey." His voice was wrecked. 8 months of bad air and not enough water. But he was here, upright, looking at her. "You look terrible." "I got married today, 3 days ago, this week." "What?" "Long story." She was already at the zip ties, Reyes behind her with cutters. "Can you walk?" "Yeah." He tested his legs as the ties came off. "Yeah, I can walk." He looked past her at Reyes, at the man behind Reyes, at the general configuration of armed people in his doorway. "Who are these guys?" "My husband's people." Marcus stared at her. "I said it was a long story." "What?" She rode back in the vehicle with Marcus. Damien rode in the lead car. They didn't speak until they were on the bridge, the Newark lights receding, and Marcus had been given water and a blanket from somewhere and was looking out the window with the expression of a man relearning what the outside of a building looked like. "Vincent," Marcus said. "I know." He told them, "The people here, the ones watching me," he told them it was temporary, that once certain things were settled, I'd be released. He turned from the window. He looked hollowed out. I almost believed him. "He's our uncle, Sari." "I know." "Why would he—" Marcus stopped, pressed his lips together, started again. What did he actually want? What was worth 8 months of port rights, she said. $40 billion of port infrastructure across 7 countries. He used Dad's company and the family I married into as financing vehicles. He needed us all in specific positions to close the structure without the ownership tracing back to him. She paused. He needed me inside the Vescari household to find the evidence and control what happened to it. Marcus was quiet for a long time. "What did you do with it?" he said. "I gave it to my husband." Another silence. "Is he—" Marcus glanced toward the front of the convoy. "Is he gonna—" "I don't know yet what he's going to do." She looked out her own window. The bridge cables passed in a rhythm. "But he brought me here tonight. That's something." She didn't say the rest of it. Didn't say that Gideon Farr had given her 212 files on behalf of a man who was running his own investigation into the same structure. Didn't say that the consigliere who'd put a hard drive on a kitchen counter at 5:45 in the morning was, according to those same 212 files, the person who had first introduced the Latvian intermediary into the money chain. A detail so small and so specific that she'd almost missed it, buried on page 147 of a document most people would have stopped reading by page 40. Gideon Farr, who had brought her the evidence. Gideon Farr, whose fingerprints were in the evidence. She'd been in this house for 72 hours, and she'd already found that the leak wasn't a random staff member with a compromised access code. The leak was the man who'd handed her the keys and told her where to look. The question she didn't have an answer to yet was whether Gideon had given her the evidence because he was trying to help, or because he needed her to find exactly what he'd shown her, and nothing more. A controlled revelation, the same play Vincent had tried, just from a different seat at the table. The convoy moved through the dark. Marcus fell asleep against the window. She stayed awake. Ahead, in the lead car, Damien was making decisions she wasn't party to yet, and somewhere in Westchester, in a study with marked-up books and a working desk, the consigliere who'd been careful for 18 months was waiting to find out what she'd do next. She waited until Marcus was asleep in a proper bed, a guest room 2 floors above her own with Reyes's man outside the door, before she went to find Damien. It was past 2 in the morning. The house was the kind of quiet that large houses get at that hour, a quiet with mass to it, the sound of many rooms holding their breath. She moved through it without turning on lights because she'd spent 4 days learning the floor plan the way she learned everything, by moving through it until the geometry was in her body rather than her head. The study light was on. She could see it under the door from 12 feet away. She knocked once. He said, "Come in," before her hand had left the door. He was at the desk. His jacket was off, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and there were 3 separate documents open in front of him with handwritten notes in the margins. He looked like a man who hadn't considered sleeping yet and wasn't going to until the math worked out. She understood that. She was the same way. "Gideon Farr," she said, without sitting down. Damien looked up. Page 147 of the Latvian intermediary file. The entity that introduced the conduit into the chain, it's registered to a Delaware LLC formed in 2019. The registered agent is a law firm in Wilmington. The firm has 4 clients on public record. She put her hand on the desk and leaned forward slightly. One of them is a holding company that traces back to a man named Farr. Damien set down his pen. He did it slowly, the way people set things down when they need their hands to be empty before they speak. "Show me," he said. She pulled the hard drive from her pocket. She'd transferred the key files before leaving her room and put it on the desk. He took it, plugged it into the laptop already open beside him, opened the file she pointed to. He read it the way he did everything, without expression, the information going in and being processed somewhere behind a face that wasn't giving status updates. She watched his eyes move across the page, watched them stop, move back, stop again. He sat back in his chair. 18 months, he said. He's been inside the structure for at least 4 years. 18 months is how long he's been inside your house knowing what he knew. He brought you the evidence. He showed me exactly what he wanted me to see. Page 147 exists in the file because he needed it there for another reason. Probably to implicate someone else further down the chain. He didn't expect me to read it that carefully. She paused. Or he underestimated how fast I read. Damien was quiet. The particular quiet of a man recalibrating something fundamental. "Last night's attack," he said. "He had the access code. He's one of 7 people who did." She let that sit. "I don't think he ordered it. I think he reported your location and scheduled to someone who did. There's a difference. It keeps his hands clean while the problem gets handled. The problem being me. The problem being the fact that you married me and started asking questions instead of staying in the configuration Vincent built." She straightened. "Gideon has been managing both sides of this for 4 years. My uncle built the structure, but Gideon's been the one keeping it stable from inside your organization. If Vincent is the architect, Gideon is the contractor." Damien stood. He moved to the window. The same window he'd been standing at the first morning, she realized, the one that faced east and showed nothing at this hour but dark and the vague suggestion of trees. He stood with his back to her, and she could see the tension in his shoulders, the specific set of a man who is angry in a way that has nowhere immediate to go. "He was my father's man," Damien said, quietly, not to her specifically. "I know." Marco trusted him completely. "I know. That's probably how it started." She moved to stand beside him, not close, just in the same general orientation. two people looking at the same dark window. Gideon didn't necessarily begin as a traitor. He may have begun as a pragmatist who made one accommodation and then couldn't stop making them. That's how Vincent works. He doesn't recruit enemies. He recruits people who need something and then makes them need more. Damien turned his head and looked at her, sideways, from a foot away. She could see the line of his jaw in the desk lamp light, the particular quality of his attention, which was total in a way that most people's wasn't. "You sound like you're defending him," he said. "I'm explaining him. There's a difference." She met his eyes. "I'm not defending anyone. Gideon fed your location to people with guns. Whatever his origin story is, that's where it ended up." A long moment. Then Damien looked back at the window. "Don't tell him what you found," he said. "Not yet." "I wasn't going to." "Go to sleep. I need to think." She went. At the door she paused, hand on the frame. "Damien." He didn't turn. "Whatever you decide to do about Gideon, do it before he figures out I read page 147. Once he knows, the timeline compresses." "How long do you think we have?" She thought about it honestly. "He'll notice within 48 hours. He watches me the same way he watches everything, patiently and then all at once." 48 hours, Damien said. "Maybe less." She left him at the window and went to bed and lay in the dark thinking about page 147 and the Delaware LLC and the 4 years of careful architecture her uncle had built through a man who had sat at Damien's father's table and eaten his food and known exactly what the family didn't know about its own money. She thought about this for a long time before she slept. Well, she had 31 hours. Not 48. 31. Because Gideon Farr was better than she'd credited, and she'd made one mistake she didn't know she'd made until it was already done. The mistake was Marcus. When she'd brought her brother into the house, she'd been focused on the convoy, on getting him settled, on the drive back and what she'd found in the files. She hadn't thought about the fact that Marcus, waking up in a strange room in a Mafia estate in Westchester, disoriented and hollowed out and running on pure adrenaline, had gone looking for his sister at 4 a.m. and had instead found Gideon Farr in the kitchen. She found out about it when Marcus appeared in her doorway at 7 a.m., looking like a man who'd just understood something he wished he hadn't. "The guy with the glasses," Marcus said. "He asked me questions." She was sitting up before he finished the sentence. "What questions?" "About you. What you'd said in the car. What you'd told me about the files." Marcus leaned against the doorframe. He looked worse in daylight than he had in the Newark warehouse. 8 months had taken real weight off him, carved his face sharper, put something permanently watchful in his eyes. "I didn't tell him anything specific, but Sarah..." He stopped. "What?" "I told him you'd been reading until 3 a.m. He said that was good, that you were thorough, and he smiled." Marcus's voice was flat. It was the smile of someone who just found out something they needed to know. I've seen that smile before. Dad used to do business with a man in Singapore who smiled like that. Serena was already out of bed. "Where's he now?" "Kitchen. Same cup of coffee he was holding 20 minutes ago." "Go back to your room. Lock it. Don't open it for anyone except me or Reyes." "Sir Marcus." She looked at him directly. "I need you to trust me for approximately 6 more hours. Can you do that?" He looked at her for a moment. Then he pushed off the doorframe and went back down the hall without another word. She heard his door close, heard the lock. She dressed in 3 minutes and went to find Damien. She found Reyes first. He was in the security room on the ground floor, which she'd located on day 2 by following the cable routing through the east wing. He looked at her when she came in with the expression of a man who was professionally disinclined to be surprised and was being tested. "Where's Damien?" she said. "Meeting." "With who?" Reyes looked at her steadily. "Miss Holloway, if that meeting is with Gideon Farr, you need to interrupt it, right now." Something shifted in Reyes's face. Fractional, but there. "Why?" he said. "Because Gideon knows I found page 147. He found out 40 minutes ago. And if he's with Damien right now, he's not there for a normal meeting." She held Reyes's eyes. "He's there to get ahead of it." Reyes was already moving before she finished the sentence. She followed him through the east corridor, up the main staircase to the second floor where Damien's private office was. Separate from the study, she'd learned, the study being where he read and thought, the office being where he conducted business. The door was closed. Reyes knocked once and opened it. Damien was behind his desk. Gideon was across from him in the chair she'd sat in during her first meeting with Damien, in approximately the same posture she'd used, contained, attentive, slightly forward. Two men in a room that looked like a normal morning meeting. Both of them looked at her when she came in. Gideon's expression did something very small and very fast. She caught it because she'd been watching for it. Not guilt, not fear. Something more controlled than either. The expression of a man who has been running contingencies in his head and just had one of them confirmed. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said. She looked at Damien. "I need 60 seconds. Damien looked at Gideon. "Give us a moment." Gideon stood without protest. He moved toward the door with the same unhurried quiet he always moved with. As he passed her, he said very low, just the two of them in that foot of space, "Page 147 has a continuation on page 203. You should read it before you make any decisions." Then he was past her, in the corridor, the door clicking shut behind him. She turned to Damien. "He knows," she said. "Yes." Damien's voice was tight. "He came to me 20 minutes ago. He told me that you'd found something in the files that was, his word, misleading. That page 147 was a document he'd included as a counterintelligence measure, designed to make the structure look like it implicated him so that the actual architect would be protected." Serena went still. "He told you he planted it," she said. "He told me it was there deliberately, that the real documentation implicating the primary organizer is on page 203, which he'd planned to show me this morning before—" Damien stopped, pressed two fingers to his forehead for a moment. "Before you came in." She felt the shape of it assembling, the horrible, elegant shape of it. "He gave me the drive," she said slowly. "He told me to start at the March cross-reference. He told me to read it alone." She was working through it as she spoke, hearing the structure click into place. If page 147 was a plant, if he built it to look like it implicated him, then he gave me the drive knowing I'd find it, knowing I'd spend the night building the case against him, knowing I'd come to you. She looked at Damien. "He used me to deliver the evidence against himself." "Why would he do that?" "Because the actual evidence, page 203, implicates someone else. Someone I would have questioned or protected or found reasons to doubt." The cold thing was back in her chest, deeper now. "He needed me to build the case against him so that when he opened page 203 this morning, you'd already have a framework for understanding it. You'd already be primed to believe a betrayal. You'd just be transferring the name." Damien opened the laptop. He pulled up the drive, found page 203. He turned the screen toward her. She read it. It took less than a minute. The document was short, dense, specific, organized with the same precision as everything else in the files. Bank routing numbers. Dates. Meridian Cross partners at the center. The same architecture she'd mapped the night before. The same port rights. The same conduit through Latvia and Dubai and Luxembourg. The name attached to the primary ownership position was not Vincent Holloway. It was Edward Holloway, her father. She sat down. She didn't choose to. The chair happened and she was in it. The room was very quiet. Damien watched her read it a second time. She read it a second time because the first time couldn't be right. The second time produced the same result. Her father's name. Her father's signature, digitized across 3 separate transfer authorizations. Her father's private email address, the one he'd had for 20 years. The one she'd written to from her first college laptop, receiving and sending documents dated across 4 years. "This is fabricated," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Serena, I need you to listen to me." She looked up from the screen. "I know what this looks like. I know what you were told this morning, and I know what page 147 was designed to make you think, and I know that page 203 arrives as the resolution to all of that, and I am telling you that this document is fabricated." She kept her voice controlled with the specific effort of someone doing something physical. "My father does not have the financial sophistication to structure this. I've been through his books. I've been through 18 years of his company records. He is a competent businessman who trusted the wrong people. He is not this. The signatures can be replicated. The email address can be spoofed with the right access. The authorization dates. Look at March 14th again. She leaned toward the screen. March 14th authorization, Edward Holloway signatory. My father was in the hospital on March 14th. Kidney stones, admitted the evening of the 13th, discharged the 16th. I was in London. I called him from my work phone at 7 p.m. on the 14th, and he was in a hospital bed complaining about the food. She looked at Damien. I have the phone records. I can pull the hospital admissions. This authorization is a forgery. Silence. If it's a forgery, Damien said carefully, Gideon built it. Gideon built it, or my uncle built it, and Gideon is the delivery mechanism. Either way, what happened this morning was the second half of a two-step operation. She forced her breathing to slow. Step 1. Plant page 147 to make me think Gideon is the architect. Give me the evidence, let me work all night, let me come to you convinced. Step 2. Gideon arrives before I can tell you about page 147, gets ahead of it, opens page 203, and the name that was supposed to be his gets replaced by my father's. She let that land. The goal was never to protect the structure. The goal was to give you a reason to go after my father. Why would anyone want that? Because if you go after Edward Holloway, if you move against him, the last legal barrier to Meridian Cross's ownership consolidation disappears. My father's name on those documents doesn't just implicate him, it transfers. The port rights, the holding position, the access agreements, they all migrate to the authenticated signatory. My father gets destroyed and the actual owner steps into what he built. She sat back. It's the last move. This is the endgame. Damien stared at her. She stared back and she could see him doing what he did, the processing behind the face, and she waited because she'd said what she had, and she couldn't say more without evidence she didn't have yet, and she needed him to get there himself. Call Gideon back in, she said. Serena. Call him in, right now before he makes another move, because in about 10 minutes he's going to realize that I walked you through the structure instead of just denying it. And at that point he goes to his contingency, and whatever that contingency is, it's worse than where we are right now. Damien looked at her for one more long second. Then he pressed the intercom on his desk. Reyes, bring Gideon back. The three of them in the room had a specific atmosphere. The atmosphere of a space where two people know something and one person is calculating how much the other two know. Gideon sat back down in his chair. His coffee was gone. He sat with his hands in his lap and his face in its default configuration, which was attentive and pleasant and gave nothing away. Page 203, Damien said. Yes, Gideon said. Walk me through how you found it. The document surfaced through the same Latvian intermediary chain. I've been tracking the entity for 6 months. The access to the primary authorization files only became possible 2 weeks ago when a source inside the Luxembourg structure provided credentials. 2 weeks ago, Serena said, the same week Damien's marriage was arranged. Gideon looked at her. Coincidence of timing. The hospital records for Edward Holloway, March 13th through 16th of this year. Kidney stones, admitted through the ER. Can you explain how he signed a transfer authorization on the 14th? Something in Gideon's face did something. Again small, again fast. This one was harder to read because it wasn't fear and it wasn't recalibration. It looked briefly like the expression of a man who has just found out he missed a variable. Medical records can be adjusted retroactively, he said, with sufficient motivation and access. So can transfer authorization, Serena said, with sufficient motivation and access. Damien's voice, when it came, was very quiet. Gideon, I need you to tell me who gave you the credentials to the Luxembourg structure. A pause, long enough to be a different kind of answer. A source I've protected for. I'm not asking you to unmask a source. Damien leaned forward. I'm asking you to tell me whether that source has ever had a direct meeting with Vincent Holloway. The pause this time was shorter, which was worse. I don't know, Gideon said. You don't know, Damien repeated. I don't have visibility into every contact my source maintains. But you can't rule it out. Another pause. No, Gideon said. I can't rule it out. The room held that for a moment. Serena watched Damien's face and saw something settle there. Not anger, not the hot kind, but the cold kind that is actually a decision being made. Reyes, Damien said. Reyes, who had been standing at the door, moved into the room. I need Gideon somewhere quiet, Damien said, and I need someone to pull the Westchester Memorial admissions records for March 13th through 16th, full documentation, tonight. Gideon stood. He didn't argue. He didn't perform indignation. He stood and looked at Damien with an expression that had gone, finally, past the practiced warmth to something underneath it that was harder to name. Not resignation exactly, more like the look of a man who has been playing a very long game and has just been informed that the board has been reset. He looked at Serena once on his way to the door. Page 203, he said, is real, whatever else you think about how it arrived. I think, Serena said, that real documents and true documents are different things, and I think you know exactly which one that is. He left with Reyes. The door closed. Damien sat in the silence for a moment with his hands flat on the desk. If your father's name is real in that document, he said carefully, then I have a problem with the families I answer to. They'll see the Holloway name and they'll act on it regardless of what we find in the hospital records. How long before they see it? Gideon's been managing my communications with the other families for 3 years. He looked up. He may have already sent it. The cold thing in Serena's chest spread outward. She thought about her father at the kitchen table, not able to look up from his hands. She thought about Marcus in the Newark warehouse with his wrists zip-tied to a beam, waiting. She thought about what it meant that Gideon had managed Damien's communications for 3 years, and that 3 years of decisions and alliances and carefully maintained relationships might all have been threaded through a man who was answering to someone else. If the other families have the document, she said slowly, and they act on it, your father becomes a target. And you become obligated to either defend him or distance yourself from the marriage. She held Damien's eyes. Either way, the last obstacle to Meridian Cross consolidates. Damien stood. I need to make calls. Make them fast. She was already at the door. I need to get my father out of his house, right now, tonight. If Gideon sent that document, whoever's moving on it moves by morning. She stopped with her hand on the doorframe. And Damien, whoever you're calling, assume Gideon has spoken to them already. Assume every alliance you think you have has been seeded with whatever narrative he's been building for 3 years. You're not making calls to people you know. You're making calls to people you think you know. She left him with that and moved fast through the corridor, phone already in her hand, her father's number already dialing, listening to it ring in a house in the city where a man who had once signed papers he didn't understand was asleep in the kitchen. Table chair he always fell asleep in, not knowing that his name was in a document that was probably already traveling through the underworld of New York at the speed of a message between men who moved first and verified later. He picked up on the 4th ring, his voice thick with sleep. Serena? Dad, don't turn the lights on. Don't call anyone. Don't open the door. Her voice came out raw. She didn't fix it. I need you to listen to me very carefully. He listened, and somewhere in the house behind her, in a room Reyes had chosen for its lack of windows and its single door, Gideon Farr sat with his hands in his lap and his coffee gone, and the expression of a man who had already made the next move before anyone thought to ask what it was. Her father made it out in 11 minutes. She knew because she stayed on the phone with him through all 11 of them, listening to the specific sounds of a 63-year-old man moving through a dark house, the groan of the 3rd stair, the scrape of his keys against the hall table, the click of the side door he always used because the front door stuck in winter and he'd never gotten around to fixing it. Small sounds from a life she knew by heart, and she stayed with every one of them because if she stopped hearing them, she would know something had gone wrong. He made it to the car, started the engine. Where am I going? He said. His voice was the voice of a man who was frightened and had decided to be practical about it. Drive toward the bridge. I'll have someone meet you before you cross. She already had Reyes on the other line, her thumb toggling between calls. Don't stop. Don't pull over. Don't answer any calls that aren't from this number. Serena. A pause. The sound of a turn signal. He'd stopped at the corner, a habit of 30 years overriding crisis. What did they say I did? She thought about page 203, about his signature on documents signed from a hospital bed. Nothing that's true, she said. Drive, Dad. He drove. Reyes had 2 men in a car 20 minutes from the city. They picked up Edward Holloway at the foot of the bridge at 4:47 in the morning and brought him north without incident. And Serena stood in the corridor outside the security room, listening to Reyes's update and feeling the specific relief of a thing accomplished before it became a thing lost. Fragile, temporary, already generating the next problem. Because the next problem was already inside the house. Gideon had made his call before Reyes got to him. They found the phone in his jacket pocket. A second phone, thin and cheap, a burner that had been there all along, and the last outgoing call had been placed at 4:12 a.m., 6 minutes before Reyes had brought him to the windowless room. 43 seconds in duration. The number it called was already disconnected. Damien looked at the phone on his desk like it was a particular kind of insult. Who did he call? He said. Not a question. We're tracing the number, Reyes said. Burner, prepaid, purchased in cash. It'll take time. We don't have time. No, Reyes agreed. Damien looked at Serena. She was standing at the window, the east window, their window now, she supposed, the one that faced the dark and the trees. Dawn was still an hour away. The sky was the specific gray of the hour before light decides to commit. He called Vincent, she said. You don't know that. I know that my uncle is the only person in this equation who benefits from a 43-second call at 4 a.m. from a man who'd just been cornered. She turned from the window. He called Vincent, and Vincent now knows that Gideon has been isolated, which means whatever Vincent's next move was, the timeline just collapsed. She looked at Damien. He'll move on my father's house within the hour. He already knew Dad was there. Gideon would have confirmed our defenses, our numbers, the fact that you sent men to pull Edward out. Your father is already out. Vincent doesn't know that yet. She held Damien's eyes, which is the only window we have. Damien was very still. What are you saying? He said. I'm saying that right now, Vincent believes he has leverage he doesn't have. He believes my father is still in that house, that Gideon is still operable, and that you're reacting instead of moving. She came away from the window. We have maybe 40 minutes before he figures out the board is shifted. 40 minutes where he's operating on false information. And you want to use those 40 minutes. I want to end this tonight. The room held that for a moment. Reyes looked at Damien. Damien looked at Serena with the expression he used when he was assessing something he hadn't fully anticipated, which was the same expression he'd used in the corridor outside the study 4 days ago when she'd explained why she'd thrown the bookend, and she was learning to read it as the face of a man who was being surprised in a way he hadn't decided yet was welcome. The warehouse, Damien said, where we pulled Marcus. Vincent will have cleared that location by now. His primary office, the one on Lexington he runs as a consultancy. Too exposed. He won't take a meeting there if he thinks things are moving. She shook her head. He has somewhere. He always has somewhere. A controlled space, something he owns through 3 layers that he uses when things get operational. I've been trying to find it in the financial records for a week. She paused. But Marcus might know. He was held for 8 months by Vincent's people. They moved him at least twice. I noticed the location data gap in the phone records Reyes pulled. Different towers, different facility. Reyes was already out the door before she finished the sentence. Marcus was awake. He had been awake for a while, sitting on the edge of the bed in the dark, the way people sit when sleep has become a foreign country they can't locate anymore. He looked up when she came in, took in the expression on her face. What happened? He said. I need you to think about the second place, she said. They moved you at some point. Different facility. Do you remember anything about it? Sounds, smells, how long the drive was, whether it was above ground? Industrial smell, Marcus said immediately. He'd been waiting to be useful, she realized. 8 months of helplessness, and he'd been waiting. Chemical, not harsh, cleaner, almost, like a place that used to store medical supplies or pharmaceutical inventory, he thought. Drive was 40 minutes, possibly 50. City sounds for the first 20, then quiet. I heard water once, not traffic noise, actual water. Somewhere near the river, or the sound. Upper level or ground? Upper. The floors vibrated when trucks went by below me, and the ceiling was high. I could tell by the echo when they brought food. She looked at him. He looked back at her with the eyes that had been her brother's eyes their whole lives, and that were now something older. Port District, she said. Near the water, pharmaceutical warehouse repurposed. She was already moving. At the door, she stopped. Stay here. Lock it again. Serena. His voice stopped her. Is Dad okay? He's on his way here. Marcus pressed his lips together, nodded once. She left. Net. Reyes had the location in 22 minutes, not from Marcus's description alone, that narrowed it to 4 possible sites along the waterfront, but from a cross-reference with Meridian Cross Partners property holdings, which Serena had mapped from the financial files, and which included a cold storage facility in Red Hook that had been converted to private use under a management company that connected through 2 intermediaries to a Vincent Holloway LLC registered in 2017. Red Hook, near the water, former pharmaceutical cold storage. 3 stories. He's there, she said. Damien looked at the map on Reyes's screen. You're certain? No, but it fits every parameter and it's his. His money, his LLC, his management layer. She put her finger on the building footprint. He's been holding this as an operational facility for 7 years, long before any of this started, which means it's not a location he chose for this situation. It's a location he's been building toward. He planned this for 7 years, Damien said. He planned everything for a long time. That's who he is. She kept her voice flat. He's patient, he's thorough, and he genuinely does not believe anyone around him is capable of thinking the way he thinks. That's his weakness. He planned for every contingency except the one where I stopped being loyal to him and started being loyal to someone I'd known for 4 days. She hadn't meant to say it that way. The room noticed. Reyes looked at the map. Damien looked at her with the expression she'd stopped trying to decode. We move in 40 minutes, Damien said. Reyes, build it. Reyes built it. The drive to Red Hook took 26 minutes at 5 in the morning, the city doing its pre-dawn thing of looking emptied out and potential, like a stage before the cast arrives. 3 vehicles, 14 people. Serena in the second car with Damien, which she hadn't asked for and which no one had discussed. It had simply been assumed, the seating arrangement reflecting something that had shifted in the topology of the household over 4 days in ways she hadn't fully mapped yet. She sat with a tablet running the financial architecture she'd built, and a second window open to the building schematics Reyes had pulled from the city planning database. The schematics were from 2019, updated once. 3 stories, 16,000 square feet, freight elevator on the north side, stairwells at both east and west ends, loading dock level on the south face. 3rd floor, she said. He'll be on the 3rd floor. Highest point, best sight lines, and it's where the private office space was built out according to the permit applications. She turned the tablet toward Damien. The south loading dock is the obvious entry. He'll have it covered. East stairwell is secondary, also covered. West stairwell connects through a maintenance corridor that wasn't in the original build-out. It was added in 2021 under a separate permit filed by the management company. Damien looked at the schematic. You read building permits. I read everything. She turned the tablet back. The west stairwell is the approach. He looked at her for a moment in the moving dark of the car. When we get there, he said, you stay back. I'll stay back from the physical entry. I won't stay in the car. He started to say something. Damien. She looked at him directly. He's my uncle. Whatever conversation happens on that 3rd floor, I need to be part of it. Not for closure. Because I know how he argues, and I know every exit he'll try to take, and I know what evidence he'll try to suppress and what he'll try to reframe. You need me in that room." A long moment. The car moved through the dark. "Behind me," he said, "the whole time. Behind me." "Behind you," she agreed. The west stairwell smelled of rust and old cold, the ghost of pharmaceutical storage, the chemical clean undertone Marcus had described. Reyes went first with 2 men, then Damien, then Serena, then 2 more behind her. 8 people moving up 3 flights in the specific silence of people trained to be quiet, which was a different silence from natural silence, thicker and more deliberate. Second floor landing. Reyes paused, listened, signaled. Clear. Third floor door was steel, industrial, with an electronic lock that had been retrofitted. One of Reyes's men had a device she didn't look at closely. 20 seconds and the lock disengaged. The door opened onto a corridor. Lit, fluorescent, institutional, the lights of a space being used. At the far end, a glow from under a door. Voices. 2, maybe 3. They moved down the corridor. Reyes took the door in a single motion, and then they were inside. Vincent Holloway was standing at a table covered in documents when they came in. He had a phone in his hand and a man on each side. Security, both large, both already reading the room and doing the math. And for a fraction of a second, his face showed something raw and unmanaged, before the composure came back over it like a curtain dropped. He looked at Serena. "Well," he said. His voice was steady, infuriatingly steady. "You move faster than I thought you would." "Put the phone down, Vincent." He set it on the table, slowly. His eyes had already moved off her and onto Damien, and the calculation in them was running at full speed. "Mr. Viscari, I want you to understand that whatever my niece has told you, there's significant context she doesn't have access to." "Page 203, Damien said, "is a document you should look at very carefully before making decisions based on it." Vincent's voice carried the measured authority of a man who has talked his way out of smaller rooms than this. "Edward Holloway has been the primary architect of this structure from the beginning, what looks like his signature on those documents because it is his signature. I've been trying to protect this family from the consequences of what Edward built." "He was in the hospital," Serena said. "Hospital admissions can be—" "I was on the phone with him, from London. My work phone, logged by the firm's communication system, time-stamped and archived." Her voice came out hard. "I have the records. I've had them since this morning. You want to explain how he signed a transfer authorization while his surgeon was explaining to him that he'd need to drink more water?" Something in Vincent's composure shifted. Not broke, shifted. A micro-adjustment, the kind you make when one support gives way and you redistribute to the others. "The authorization could have been prepared in advance, on a date certain that corresponds to a transfer that wasn't decided until March 12th? She stepped forward. Damien's hand came to her arm, not restraining, steadying. She registered it and stayed where she was. "You built the date into the document after the fact. You needed a specific date to close the ownership transfer to Meridian Cross, and you backfilled the authorization to match. You did it quickly, and you made one mistake. You used a date when you knew where my father was, but you didn't check what he was doing." Vincent looked at her. His eyes were the eyes she'd known her whole life, watchful, precise, always slightly ahead. But they were doing something different now. They were doing the thing eyes do when someone is arriving, finally and irreversibly, at a calculation they've been refusing to complete. "You know what the worst part is?" Her voice came out quieter now, which was worse than loud. "I defended you, to myself, for years. Every time something felt wrong, every time a number didn't line up, I built an explanation that kept you clean. Because you sat with me after Mom's accident, and you helped me study for my licensing exam, and you came to London for my firm's anniversary dinner even though you hated flying." She felt the words like something physical. "I kept making you make sense." Vincent said nothing. For the first time since they'd entered the room, he said nothing. One of his security men moved. He moved toward Damien, which was a mistake, because Reyes had been watching him move the way a man watches the thing in the room most likely to require attention, and what happened next was fast and definitive and ended with the security man on the floor and the other one very still with two of Reyes's people in his immediate space. Vincent had not moved. He was looking at the table, at the documents on it. "Those documents go with us," Damien said. His voice had its full authority back, the stripped-down quality that wasn't loud and didn't need to be. "All of it. Whatever you were planning to do tonight, it's done. The people you were going to call, they're going to get a different version of this story before morning." "You can't," Vincent started. "The federal contacts I have," Damien said, "are people your structure was specifically designed to avoid. People who've been looking at Meridian Cross for 2 years without the ownership documentation." He paused. "My wife spent 4 days building the complete picture. Every transfer, every conduit, every LLC 3 layers down from the one with your actual name on it." He looked at Vincent with the cold quality that Serena he had watched for 4 days from various angles and was only now understanding the full depth of. "We've been waiting for this room." The words landed the way he'd intended them to. She saw it in Vincent's face, the specific arrival of a man who has understood that the loss is complete, that the contingencies are gone, that the architecture he spent years building has been handed, brick by brick, to the people most capable of dismantling it. Vincent looked at her one more time. "Your father," he said. His voice had changed, lower, almost private. "You think he's innocent. You've always thought everyone around you was innocent, and you were the one who had to fix things." His eyes were direct now, stripped of the calculation. "Edward came to me 15 years ago. He wanted leverage in a port negotiation in Rotterdam. He asked me to find a way to move money that didn't show on the books. I built the first conduit for him, Serena. He knew what it was." Her heart was hitting the inside of her chest. "Prove it," she said. "Ask him." Vincent's mouth made the shape of a smile that had no warmth in it anywhere. "Ask him about Rotterdam. Ask him what he needed the money for and why he needed it off the books, and whether he asked where it was going." He tilted his head. "I didn't invent your father's sins. I expanded them. There's a difference." The room was absolutely silent. She heard her own breathing. She heard Damien, a foot behind her right shoulder, and the specific quality of his stillness that she'd learned meant he was waiting for her to decide something. She thought about her father at the kitchen table. She thought about March 14th and the hospital and the phone call and his voice thick with sleep when she'd called him 2 hours ago, frightened and compliant and ready to be saved. She thought about the fact that she'd been doing forensic analysis for 12 years and the one set of books she'd never looked at without already deciding what she'd find was her father's. "Reyes," she said. Her voice came out even. "Bag everything on that table." She looked at Vincent one last time. "If what you're saying is true," she said, "it'll come out in the documentation, and you'll be able to say you told me." She paused. "But you don't get to use it as a card in this room. Whatever my father did or didn't do, you took a 15-year-old decision and you weaponized it against 2 families and a kidnapping and a murder attempt, and you've been moving toward this for so long you've convinced yourself it's justified." She took a breath. "It isn't." Vincent looked at her with something that might have been, once, underneath everything, something like grief. Then Reyes had him by the arm, and the men were moving, and the documents were going into bags, and the operation was becoming the aftermath of the operation, which was always the harder part, because in the aftermath, you had to live with what you'd found out. She stood in the middle of the floor while the room moved around her, and she felt Damien stop beside her, not touching, just present, his shoulder a foot from hers. "Rotterdam," he said quietly. "I don't know yet." "You're going to ask him?" "Yes." A pause. Below them, through the old floors, she could hear trucks on the street outside. The city starting its morning, the indifferent, continuing sound of a world that had not noticed any of this. "Whatever the answer is," Damien said, "it doesn't change the document. It doesn't change what we can prove." "I know." She turned and looked at him. This close, in this light, he looked tired in the way people look tired when they've been running on tension for too long, and the tension has just discharged. "Does it change what you do with it?" He held her eyes for a long moment. "That depends," he said carefully, "on what he tells you." She nodded once, looked back at the room being cleared, at the table where the documents had been, now bare under the fluorescent light. She thought about asking her father about Rotterdam, and she thought about the kitchen table, and she thought about the third stair that groaned and the side door he used because the front door stuck, and she thought about how you love a person for 63 years. And then you stand in a converted pharmaceutical warehouse at 5 in the morning and understand that the story you've been telling about them might need to be rewritten from somewhere in the middle. Reyes appeared in the doorway. "We need to move. 2 vehicles inbound, Fitzy. Vincent's people, 10 minutes out." Damien moved. She moved with him, into the corridor toward the west stairwell, the way they'd come, back through the rust and cold and chemical ghost of the building's previous life. On the stairs, Damien in front, she said, "The federal contacts you mentioned." "Real," he said without turning. "You've been building toward this too." He paused on the landing, turned and looked up at her from one step below, which put them almost level. His face in the stairwell light was the most readable she'd seen it. Not open, not warm, but honest in a way that was different from performance. "6 months," he said, "since I found the first discrepancy in the offshore accounts. I didn't know where it led. I didn't know it led to your uncle. I didn't know it led to you." He paused. "I said yes to the marriage because I needed to know what was built, not because of Vincent's offer." She looked at him on the stair below her. "The night of the attack," she said, "you weren't surprised." "I was surprised it was that fast. But not that it happened." "No." He held her gaze. "I knew something was coming. I didn't know you'd be the one in the corridor." The sound from below, Reyes moving, vehicles outside, the operation folding into itself, reached them on the landing. They both heard it. Neither moved immediately. She thought about 4 days, about a bookend and a kitchen counter at 5:45 a.m., and a hard drive and a brother zip-tied to a support beam and a father asleep in a chair and a stairwell in Red Hook at the hour before dawn. "We need to go," she said. "We need to go," he agreed. They went down the stairs together, into the cold, into the waiting vehicles, into the part of the story where the evidence was bagged and the architect was in custody and the documentation was complete and everything that had been built in the dark was about to meet the light. And the one question left, the one she hadn't answered yet, was what she would find when she looked at her father, not as a daughter who had already decided, but as the analyst she had spent 12 years becoming, and whether those two things could exist in the same person without one of them breaking the other. The car door closed. The convoy moved. Dawn was 20 minutes away and coming whether anyone was ready for it or not. Edward Holloway was sitting at the kitchen table in the Westchester estate when Serena came in at 6:45 in the morning. Not the kitchen table from the house in the city. That table was in a house that no longer felt safe and might not feel safe again for a long time. This was the kitchen table of a family she'd married into 4 days ago, and her father was sitting at it in the clothes he'd left home in, with a cup of coffee Donna had made him, and his hands wrapped around it the way he always wrapped his hands around a cup, both palms flat against the ceramic like he was trying to absorb the warmth through his skin. He looked up when she came in. She sat down across from him, not beside him. Across. He read the geography of it. She watched him read it. Something in his face did the thing faces do when they've been braced for something for a long time, and the something has finally arrived. Not collapse, not relief, but the specific settling of a man who has been holding a weight and has just been told he can put it down, even though putting it down is going to hurt. "Rotterdam," she said. He looked at his coffee. "Dad?" "It was 2009, he said. His voice was quiet and came from somewhere that had been rehearsing this for a long time. "The port negotiation. I needed to move $40 million in consulting fees off the books. There was a union issue, a local official who needed to be managed, and if the payment showed on the Holloway accounts, it would have triggered a compliance review that would have killed the deal." He paused. "Vincent said he knew a way. He said it was clean. One time." "One time," Serena said. "It was supposed to be one time." She sat with that. The kitchen hummed its kitchen sounds. Outside, the first real light was pressing against the window, gray going slowly gold. "The consulting fees," she said. "Who were they actually paid to?" Her father's hands tightened on the cup. "A port official in Rotterdam," he said, "and 2 members of the union board." He didn't look up. It was a bribe, Serena. I knew what it was. I told myself it was standard, that everyone did it in that market, that it was the cost of operating internationally, that it wasn't different from what... He stopped. There isn't a version of it that isn't what it was. She breathed carefully. Did you know what Vincent did with the conduit afterward? She said. No. He looked up then. His eyes were red, and she believed the redness, which was the hardest part. After Rotterdam, I didn't think about it again. The deal closed. The company grew. Years went by, and I told myself the thing I'd done was small enough to be buried under everything that came after. He looked at her directly. I didn't know he'd kept it, that he'd built on top of it, that what I gave him was a foundation for... He stopped again. He told me you came to him, she said, that you asked him to find a way. Yes, that's true. Yes. She looked at her father, 63 years old, the man who had taught her to read a balance sheet and to drive a stick shift and to always check the margin notes because that's where people put the things they didn't want to say out loud. The man who had built something real from very little and had made one accommodation to the way the world actually worked and had spent 15 years being used for it. Vincent took what you gave him and he multiplied it, she said. Every year, another layer, another family, another conduit, another instrument. He built an empire on the back of one payment you made in 2009, and he did it without telling you because once he had that payment, he didn't need your consent for anything else. He had your signature. He had the original structure. Everything he built after that, you were part of whether you knew it or not. She kept her voice even. That's how he works. That's always been how he works. Her father set down the cup, very carefully, like he was afraid of what would happen if he wasn't careful with something. What happens now? He said. The federal documentation goes in this morning. The full meridian cross structures, every layer, every transfer, every ownership position. Vincent's name is on the primary holding. His signature is on the consolidation documents. She paused. Your signature is on the 2009 Rotterdam transfer. He nodded slowly. You'll need a lawyer, she said. A good one. Not a family lawyer. A federal defense attorney. Someone who handles financial crimes. The 2009 payment is old, but it's in the chain. They'll find it. She kept her eyes on his. But Vincent has 47 subsequent moves that build on that foundation, and every one of them was executed without your knowledge or consent, and the documentation proves it. Your attorneys will have something to work with. Will I go to prison? She didn't look away. I don't know. Probably not for long. Possibly not at all if the cooperation value is high enough and the original payment is treated as the predicate offense rather than a conspiracy count. She paused. I'm not a lawyer, Dad. I can't promise you anything. He nodded again. Something had gone out of him. Not strength exactly, more like a specific kind of tension, the tension of waiting for a reckoning that has finally stopped being future tense. I'm sorry, he said, for what I did, for what it made possible. He looked at his hands. For Marcus. She didn't say it was okay. It wasn't entirely okay. And he didn't need her to make it okay. He needed her to hear it. She heard it. Get some sleep, she said. I'll have Damien's attorney contact you in 2 hours with a referral. She stood. At the door she paused, because there was one more thing and she'd been deciding whether to say it since the stairwell in Red Hook. Rotterdam, she said. Was that the only time? He met her eyes. Yes, he said. She believed him. She didn't know if believing him was the analyst's conclusion or the daughter's. She suspected it was the daughter's, and she decided that was acceptable, this once, for this specific question. She left him at the table and went to find Damien. The federal contact's name was Harlow. She never learned his first name or his specific title, only that he arrived at 9 a.m. in an unmarked car with 2 other people who moved with the particular purposefulness of people who have been waiting for a specific kind of paperwork for a long time. Damien met them in the study. Serena sat in the chair across the desk, the chair that had become, in 4 days, a chair she thought of as hers, which was the kind of small territorial claim that surprised her when she noticed it. Harlow's people set up a laptop and an external drive, and they went through the Meridian Cross documentation for 3 hours with the methodical appetite of people feeding a case that was finally getting what it had been hungry for. Harlow himself spoke rarely and listened with the specific quality of someone translating everything he heard into evidence categories. When Serena walked him through the Latvia, Dubai, Luxembourg chain, he leaned forward slightly and asked 3 precise questions, and the precision of the questions told her the shape of the investigation he'd been running, the negative space it had around the peace she was giving him now. "The 2009 Rotterdam payment," he said. "You have documentation." "It's in the chain," she said. "The origin transfer, my father made it. He's prepared to cooperate fully." Harlow looked at her without expression. "What's he asking for?" "Sentencing consideration in exchange for full cooperation and testimony. His attorney will formalize it." She held his eyes. The payment was his. Everything built on top of it for 15 years was not. Harlow looked at Damien. Damien returned the look with nothing on his face. "The Viscari offshore accounts," Harlow said. "The ones that appear in the chain as conduit vehicles." "Were used without the organization's knowledge or authorization," Damien said. "The documentation shows the entry points. They're consistent with access that predates my tenure and that corresponds to individuals no longer associated with this organization." "Gideon Farr," Harlow said, "who is currently available for your interview." A pause. "There are elements of the Viscari operation," Harlow said carefully, "that we've been interested in separately." "I know," Damien said. "We can discuss that separately." It was the most carefully constructed sentence she'd heard him say, and she'd been paying attention to his sentences for 4 days. She understood what it meant. There was a negotiation happening here that had been in motion for 6 months. That was larger than Vincent and Meridian Cross. That was going to require Damien to give things and get things in a calibration she wasn't fully party to and wasn't going to be. That was his to navigate, the same way Rotterdam was hers. She'd understood that when he told her about the federal contacts in the stairwell. She'd understood that this outcome required everyone to have done the math on what they were willing to trade. The meeting ended at noon. Harlow's people took the drives and the documentation and left with the specific quiet efficiency of people carrying something they'd been waiting for. When the door closed, the study had the hollowed-out feeling of a space from which something large had just departed. Damien sat behind the desk. She sat across from him. "Gideon," she said. "He talked this morning, before Harlow arrived." Damien's voice was flat. His cooperation was comprehensive. "What did he give them?" 3 years of internal communications, his contact inside Vincent's operation, the burner network, the full account of how the access codes for this house were compromised. He paused. He also gave them his own role in the Latvia conduit, every transaction he touched. He didn't try to minimize it. She thought about Gideon at the kitchen counter at 5:45 in the morning, the practiced warmth, the coffee cup, the hard drive placed between them like a key. She thought about page 147 and page 203 and the Delaware LLC and the 43-second call at 4 in the morning. "Why?" she said. Damien looked at the desk for a moment. "He said, and I'm giving you this because you should have it, he said he'd been trying to find a way out of the structure for 2 years, that once Vincent had what he needed from Gideon, the arrangement stopped being voluntary in any meaningful sense. He stayed because leaving meant either exposure or something worse." He paused. "He said giving you the drive was the first move he'd made in 2 years that wasn't dictated by the structure he was inside." She sat with that. "Do you believe him?" she said. "I believe the part about wanting out," Damien said. "The method he chose to get there, using you as the delivery mechanism without telling you what you were carrying, that's harder." He looked at her. "He put you at risk. He knew page 147 would lead you to him, and that you'd bring it to me, and that there was a version of the night where I moved on him before anyone understood what page 203 was." He paused. "He gambled with your position in this house." "He gambled correctly." "Yes, which doesn't make it the right call." She thought about that, about the specific moral weight of a man who makes the right move for the wrong reasons and uses the wrong person to make it. She filed it in the same place she was filing Rotterdam, in the category of things that were true and complicated and not going to resolve into something simple just because she wanted them to. What happens to him? She said. Federal custody, cooperation agreement. It'll reduce the exposure significantly. Damien's voice was neutral. He won't come back here. She nodded. Outside the study window, the afternoon had arrived without her noticing, and the trees in the east yard were doing the thing they did in November when the light came at a low angle, going briefly gold before the gray took back over. Vincent Holloway was arrested formally at 2 p.m. that afternoon. Not at the Red Hook facility. He'd been moved by that point, transferred into federal custody through a mechanism she didn't ask the details of. The arrest was processed quietly, without press, the way federal financial crime arrests usually were. The press would come later when the indictment was unsealed and the Meridian Cross ownership structure became public record. When it became public record, it would be reported as one of the largest port infrastructure fraud cases in federal history. 7 countries, 41 shell entities, 15 years of architecture built on a single bribe in Rotterdam in 2009. She read the eventual coverage months later, the way you read about something you lived through, looking for the version that matches what you know, finding the version that matches what can be proven, which is a different and always smaller thing. The day of the arrest, she was in the kitchen when Marcus found her. He looked better. 2 days of sleep and real food and the particular restoration of a person who has been in a small room for a long time, returning to a space with multiple windows. He still had the watchfulness. She suspected he'd have that for a while, maybe permanently, but underneath it, he was starting to look like her brother again. He sat across from her at the counter. "Dad called me," he said. "I know. He told me about Rotterdam." She looked at her coffee. "He told me you told him you believed it was the only time," Marcus said. "He wanted me to know he'd told you that, and that it was true." He paused. "He wanted me to know he wasn't going to ask either of us to say it was okay." She looked up. "Is it?" Marcus said, not accusing, actually asking. "No," she said, "and yes, and I don't know, all 3 are true simultaneously." She looked at her brother. "He made a decision that was corrupt, and he knew it was corrupt, and he spent 15 years not looking at what it made possible. And Vincent took what he gave him and built a weapon out of it." She paused. "The weapon is Vincent's. The ammunition was Dad's. I don't know where one ends and the other begins, and I'm not sure the law is going to draw that line the way I'd draw it." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "What do we do?" he said. She thought about it honestly. "We help him get the best lawyer available. We cooperate with anything that helps the case against Vincent. We don't pretend what Rotterdam was." She met Marcus's eyes. "And we don't leave him." Marcus nodded once, slowly. "Okay," he said. It was the whole conversation, and it was enough. 3 weeks passed. The indictment unsealed. The Meridian Cross structure became public in the way that complex financial crimes become public. In a press release summarizing 10,000 pages of documentation into 6 bullet points that missed most of the texture of it. Vincent's name was in the headline. The port rights across 7 countries were frozen pending the federal case. 3 co-defendants were named, including 2 of the Luxembourg entity directors, whose identities had been buried in the Shell network. Gideon Farr was listed as a cooperating witness. His name appeared once in the final paragraph and then disappeared into the legal machinery that handles cooperating witnesses. Edward Holloway's attorneys negotiated his cooperation agreement over 2 weeks. The Rotterdam payment was characterized as the predicate offense. His cooperation on all subsequent Meridian Cross transactions earned him a deferred prosecution agreement with conditions. He would not go to prison. He would pay a civil penalty. He would testify if called. She was in Damien's study when she got the call from her father's attorney confirming the terms. She was working. She'd been working every day, partly because the Meridian Cross documentation still needed to be organized for the federal case, and partly because work was how she processed things that didn't have clean resolutions, and nothing in the past 3 weeks had a clean resolution. She put the phone down on the desk when the call ended. Damien was across the room, standing at the window. He spent a lot of time at that window. She'd stopped reading it as aloofness. It was just how he thought, standing with the light coming at him, while his mind worked through things she didn't have full access to yet. "Deferred prosecution," she said. "He's out." Damien looked at the window for another moment, Then he turned. "Good," he said, simply. She looked at him. "You knew that was the likely outcome." "I knew what I told Harlow about the conduit and about your father's position in the chain. I knew how Harlow was likely to use it." He came away from the window and sat in the chair across from her. Her chair, the one she'd been sitting in, except she'd moved to the desk. So now the chairs had swapped and she was the one behind the desk and he was across from her, and they both noticed this at the same moment. Something about the noticing felt like the shape of things going forward. "You advocated for him," she said. "I gave accurate information in a way that was complete." He held her eyes. "Your father made one corrupt decision and paid for it in 15 years of being used by the man he trusted. The law can decide what that's worth. I wasn't going to make it worse." She looked at him for a long time. She'd been looking at him for 3 weeks, finding new angles, finding the places where the cold precision gave way to something more human that he hadn't learned to suppress, only learned to keep out of the general field of view. She thought about a corridor on a wedding night and a bronze bookend. She thought about a stairwell at dawn and the specific quality of a shoulder a foot from hers. "Damien," she said. "Yes." "The 18 months. The original term of the marriage contract. The estimated timeline for the debt restructuring, after which the marriage could be dissolved. The debt is gone. The restructuring isn't necessary anymore because the underlying fraud has been exposed and the exposure transferred to Vincent's estate." He looked at her steadily. "The contract terms," she said carefully, "have been superseded by events." "Yes." "Which means technically, he said, the agreement we signed is no longer operative in any of its original conditions." She looked at the desk, then back at him. "Is that what you want?" she said. "For it to be not operative?" The room was very quiet. "No," he said. The word came out without the usual processing delay, which was the most revealing thing he'd done in 3 weeks. He seemed to know it. Something moved in his face, not discomfort exactly, more like the expression of a man who has said an honest thing out loud and is deciding whether to take it back or let it stand. He let it stand. "I've been in this house for 3 weeks," she said. "I know which stair creaks. I know Donna won't make the coffee strong enough, and I know Reyes thinks I'm a liability, and I know the east window faces the direction the light comes from first." She looked at him. "I know you read in the study until 2 a.m., and that you marked the margins and everything, and that you stood at that window the first night and didn't move for 20 minutes because that's how you process things you don't have an answer for yet." His face was very still. "I know I was a transaction," she said. "I know that's what you agreed to. And I know that what this turned into is not what either of us agreed to." She held his gaze. "But I don't want to leave." A long moment, the afternoon light at the window, the sounds of the house around them, the specific sounds that a house makes when it has been populated long enough to have its own rhythms. "Then don't," he said. It was not a declaration. It was not a romantic gesture. It was a man who had spent his entire adult life inside structures that required him to calculate everything, saying one sentence that had not been calculated, and she understood the weight of that because she was the same kind of person, and she understood exactly what it cost him. She understood it the way you understand something that doesn't need to be translated. The months that followed were not easy. She'd known they wouldn't be. Easy was not the operating condition of the lives they were both living, and she'd have mistrusted easy if it arrived, the way you mistrust a calculation that comes out too clean. The federal case moved slowly, the way federal cases do. Vincent's attorneys filed continuances and motions and challenged the chain of custody on 3 separate pieces of documentation, and each challenge had to be answered, and answering them required her to be available to the prosecution team in ways that occupied significant portions of months 3 and 4. She sat in rooms with prosecutors and went through the financial architecture layer by layer, and each time she went through it, she found herself thinking about the specific patience of a man who builds a structure across 15 years, who waits and adds one instrument and then waits again. And she thought about patience as both a virtue and a weapon, and how thin the line was between them. Damien dismantled things concurrently. She watched him do it the way she'd watched him do everything, with the cold precision that she'd learned was not coldness, but focus. The same focus she used on spreadsheets turned toward the human infrastructure of an organization that had been built on violence and was being rebuilt into something less so. It was not a simple process, and he made no claim that it was. 3 men who refused to accept the transition were dealt with in ways she didn't ask the details of. 4 legitimate businesses that had been laundering vehicles became simply businesses. The offshore accounts that hadn't been part of the Meridian Cross conduit were closed or transferred. Reyes stayed. He remained convinced she was a liability for approximately 6 weeks past the Red Hook operation before something shifted, and after that he treated her with the specific respect of a man who has revised an assessment and is not going to make a production of it. Marcus went back to the city in month 2. He got an apartment near their father, who was living in a smaller place now. The old house had been sold, part of the civil penalty terms, and who was doing the slow work of being a person who has had a fundamental story about himself revised. She called him every Sunday. The conversations were careful at first, and then less careful, and then one Sunday he made a joke about the 3rd stair, and she laughed, and the laugh was real, which felt like something. She visited on a Tuesday in March. Not Sunday, just Tuesday, because she was in the city for a prosecution meeting, and she stopped by unannounced the way she used to when she was 23 and her schedule didn't exist yet. He was in the kitchen. He had coffee going and a newspaper on the table and the particular Sunday newspaper energy of a man who had settled into a smaller life and was finding, slowly and with difficulty, that it still had dimensions. He looked up when she came in. "You look different," he said. "Different how?" He studied her, the way he used to study her when she was small, and he was trying to understand what she needed. "Settled," he said. "Not calm, settled." She sat down at his table. He poured her coffee. "How is he?" her father asked. He said he without specification, the way people refer to a presence that doesn't require a name. "Good," she said. Then more honestly, "Complicated. Getting less complicated." Her father nodded. He wrapped his hands around his cup. "He called me," Edward said, 2 months ago. "I didn't mention it because I wasn't sure how." He looked at the table. "He called to tell me about the attorney referral and to make sure I understood the full scope of the cooperation agreement. Very businesslike." He paused. And then, at the end, he said that Serena had told him Rotterdam was the only time. Another pause. He said he thought I should know that she believed that. She looked at her coffee. "He didn't have to do that," her father said. "No," she said. "He didn't." Her father was quiet for a moment. "Thank you," he said, "for believing it." She looked up. "It was true." "I know, but you didn't have to." She held his eyes. "Yes, I did," she said. "That's the job." He didn't ask which job she meant. She suspected he understood that she meant all of them simultaneously. Analyst, daughter, the person she was still in the process of becoming, the one who had learned in 4 days in November that the structures you build to protect the people you love are only as strong as the honesty you're willing to bring to what you find inside them. It was June when Damien found her in the study. She was working. She was almost always working. She'd taken a position consulting for a federal oversight body that was building new monitoring frameworks for international port infrastructure, which was either ironic or inevitable, and she'd decided it was both. The laptop was open, 3 windows, the particular organized chaos of her actual working state, which was different from the organized chaos she presented to clients. Damien came in and stood in the doorway for a moment, which was unusual. He came in, or he didn't, he wasn't a man who stood in doorways, and she looked up. He was holding something, a document. She could see from across the room that it was printed, not digital, formal paper with the header of a law firm. He came to the desk and set it in front of her. She looked at it, read the header. Read the first paragraph. It was the original marriage contract. A copy. The original was in a filing box that she'd seen once in the estate's document room. This was a copy that someone had retrieved and had the firm officially certify. She looked up at him. "I've been thinking about what you said," he said, 3 weeks ago, about the contract being superseded. "Yes. You're right that the original terms don't apply." He reached into his jacket pocket and took out a lighter. A plain one, silver, the kind that lasted. "I thought about rewriting the terms. New conditions. New timeline. He held her eyes. But I didn't want new conditions. He set the lighter on the desk next to the document. She looked at the lighter, at the document, at him. I'm not a person who does things simply, he said. I want you to know that going in. Whatever going in means at this point. I know, she said. Neither am I. The organization is different than it was. It's going to be more different in another year. Some of what I'm building isn't going to be finished for a long time, and some of it isn't going to work, and I'm going to make decisions you'll think are wrong. Yes, she said, and I'm going to tell you when I think you're wrong. I know. Something in his face moved. I'm counting on it. She picked up the lighter, looked at the document. Then she picked up the document, walked to the east window. Their window, the one that faced the direction the light came from first, and she lit the corner of it and held it while it caught and burned down to where she had to drop it, and she watched it finish on the study floor until there was nothing left but the particular curl of burned paper that contracts make when they go. She set the lighter on the windowsill. Behind her, Damien hadn't moved. She turned and looked at him across the study, across the room with the marked-up books and the working desk and the window and the ash on the floor. And for a moment, neither of them said anything. Outside, through the glass, June was doing what June does in Westchester, making the trees that much more saturated, the light coming at an angle that turned everything it touched briefly into something that looked like it had been chosen. She crossed the room. She stopped in front of him, closer than the 6 feet of 2 chairs on a wedding night, closer than a foot apart in a corridor after a bookend and a gun. And she looked at him with the specific directness she'd been deploying since she was 22 years old and had learned that the only way to read a balance sheet honestly was to look at what it actually said and not at what you needed it to say. For the first time, he said quietly, I want you to stay because it's your choice. She looked at him. She was a financial analyst who had married a crime boss to save her father and had found fraud and a kidnapping and a 15-year conspiracy and had thrown a bronze bookend at a man with a gun and had sat across from her father at 2 different kitchen tables and had learned things about the people she loved that she couldn't unlearn and had decided to stay anyway. She reached into the pocket of her jacket. She'd been carrying the wedding ring there for 3 weeks. Not wearing it, not discarding it, carrying it the way you carry something you haven't made a decision about yet. She took it out, put it on, and chose him. Not because of sacrifice, not because of fear, not because of the contract that was now ash on a study floor, but because she was the person who looked at what things actually were and not at what she needed them to be. And what this was, in its honest and complicated and unfinished form, was the truest thing she'd found in it. The city went on outside. The summer went on. The cases proceeded through their systems and the organizations restructured, and the port rights were eventually transferred under new compliance frameworks to legitimate operators, and the documentation went into archives that would outlast all of them. Inside the study, the ash cooled, and 2 people who had each spent their entire lives inside structures built by others, money, obligation, inheritance, violence, the long specific weight of what families make you, stood in the one they'd built themselves, imperfect and unfinished and entirely their own, and stayed.